Good morning, party people, and welcome to Office Hours, doing a Black Friday edition of Office Hours. We do a big annual Black Friday sale over at BrentOzar.com, and I kind of got to stay by the computer while that happens. This isn't part of my normal stream schedule. I just hopped in here because I'm like, oh, as long as I'm in here watching the Black Friday sale go, I might as well fire open a quick stream and do a few of your questions. So let's see here. We'll go through the top voted questions from over at PollGab. The number one top voted question is from MatthewsSQLServer, who says, how can AlwaysON AG failovers be analyzed? Is it a database infrastructure, Active Directory issue? Can you suggest any videos or blogs that can help? I wish I could. So the problem is it's kind of like saying, I walked into the cockpit of an airplane and there are all these dials and knobs that I've never seen before. When there's a plane crash, can you help me understand how to analyze that? AlwaysON availability groups is really hard and complex. There are so many moving parts, as you've guessed, inside your answer or inside your question. So there's not really a simple walkthrough on how to do root cause analysis, just like you won't find a simple a blog post on how to analyze plane crashes. You really have to work in the industry doing that kind of thing hands-on. If you enjoy that kind of work, this is going to sound crazy, but go get a job at Microsoft. Because the one company that really has a whole lot of resources on that kind of thing would be Microsoft. SQL Pilot, good to see you over there in chat. Jessica Phoenix says, thank you for saving money by going live so I can watch this instead of shopping, right? I know. And thank you for picking up the bundles. That's very cool. It's always nice to see people pick up the bundles this time of year. It's fun to see people go, oh, I can grab this and save a ton of money. Next up, we have NotADeveloper, who says, we have a 40 terabyte database. There are discussions to move it into MongoDB because it provides sharding and its caching is better than SQL. There's no partitioning today. Mongo's has sharding and caching. What route is better for a very large database? By the time you hit 40 terabytes, your ability to get a free answer from stuff like YouTube is dead and gone. Like, you are now up in the top 1% of the top 1% of SQL servers worldwide, and you're not going to find easy canned answers for that. It's going to depend on your query access patterns, how hard the code will be to rip and replace, because every single query is going to have to change. How you're going to do reporting, how you're going to get data in and out of there for things like data warehouses. It is a big, complex question that usually involves weeks or months worth of consulting work in order to get to the right answer. Now, I'm going to give you the short answer, which is if you have 40 terabytes worth of key value data, if all you're doing is passing in a key and getting a value back, you should probably be in something more NoSQL-ish like MongoDB. If your queries have a lot of complex joins and you're relying on filtering to get down to as little result set as possible, as quickly as possible, doing things like data warehousing queries, then you're probably going to be better off in SQL Server. SQL Pilot, thank you for the 2-year anniversary. That's very cool. 2 years. It's crazy. Sometimes I even wonder how long I've been streaming doing stuff like this, let alone talking about that in Twitch. Excuse me. One of these days I got to get a quick mute button up here. I have one somewhere, but I'm not quite sure which button. No, I think I even took it off. Jessica, very funny. All right, let's see. Next up. Oh, this is so good. Alex says, when a client calls for an emergency job, do you charge per hour or do you analyze the problem at hand? So here's what I do. When someone calls in with an emergency job, typically they want someone right away, and I'm doing something else. So what I do is I have an email reply that says, if you want me to get to a computer and start working with you, it's a 4-hour minimum block. Like, you have to book for 4 hours right away. I have no guarantees because I don't know what the problem is. You're asking me to walk in cold and I have no prep time to dig through the data. I can't go dig through diagnostic data if I'm out having fun with my family or whatever. So it's kind of like a taxi cab. For them to drop the flag, there's a minimum charge for that. It's the same thing with me with consulting. It's a 4-hour minimum block. And it's fairly expensive. Just to give you a rough idea, I do $5,000 for a 4-hour block. And a lot of clients and people will go, oh my God, that's insane. Well, you're right, because I'm out having a good time. And for me to give up whatever I'm doing with my loved ones, it's going to cost you, because I don't want to just leave my friends and family in order to go troubleshoot a disk full issue. So that way people immediately get that, oh, there's a cost to this, and either they're going to dig further to try and figure it out themselves, or they get out the credit card and they go, just tell us where to swipe. And in that point, I can go straight to a computer and I can really dig into it. Next up, ImAfraidOfBI says, after restoring a database, what do you suggest is done to test and make sure that the restore is good? checkdb, DBCC checkdb with extended logical checks. That'll really dig into it and make sure that every index is good, every single page in there is good, and so forth. Jessica goes on with emergency pricing. If you pay it, this is worth it for me if you actually pay this. I also tell clients, look, I really can't guarantee anything in one of those 4-hour blocks. I might walk in, do some digging and say, oh, you know what? You have massive database corruption. This is why you're down. You're going to have to restore from backup. I've had other issues where I was able to solve it in a matter of minutes. One of my favorite examples with that was I said, oh, somebody's flipped this switch right here. Is they set max memory tremendously lower. I don't know why they did that, but let's just set it back up correctly. And we were done in 20 minutes. You know, we're completely off the call, ready to go. And the client who'd paid for that 4-hour block was like, hold on a second here. You know, we paid for 4 hours. And I'm like, oh, we can sit here. Whatever you want to talk about, you know, I'd be glad to do it. They're like, well, can you just look around? I said, sure, absolutely. I said, can you do me a favor, though? Can you check with everyone else on the call and make sure that they want to sit here while I go look around at the SQL Server? Because I will. I just want to make sure that your own staff wants to do it. And in that case, the client was like, no, actually, we don't. Next up, Mobius says, what is your opinion of Copilot SQL query optimization? The problem with Copilot today, as of today, it's November 24th of 2023. The problem with Copilot today is that it doesn't know your database schema unless you extract the entire database schema and put it into Copilot and say, here's my database schema, here's every table that's involved with the query, here's every index that I have, here's the query, can you optimize this for me? And in that case, that's more work than most people are willing to do. Now, I will say that I bet Microsoft's chock full of really smart people. I bet that Microsoft is actively working on something with Copilot where it'll automatically extract the relevant tables from your database schema. The problem is it's going to be harder than it sounds because they can't just extract the entire database schema. And every piece that they do extract slows down the processing for ChatGPT, aka Copilot. The longer that your prompt is, the more work that it takes to analyze that prompt and the more expensive it is. So Microsoft has to figure out how do they only extract the relevant objects for the query and make sure that they get things like indexes inside there as well. Morse says they demoed this at PASS last week. So it's real easy to demo something and have it not actually work out in the real world. So I would just be really careful of a demo up from a keynote stage. When can you get it? And then have it actually analyze your tables and give you realistic advice. I have not seen that yet. Maybe you have. I have not. Renegade Larson, thanks for the Tier 1 subscription for 20 months. Very cool. Next up, Eduardo says, are there any gotchas when upgrading from an older version of Ola's maintenance solution to the latest version? The gotcha is that he just doesn't actually upgrade it that often. I don't think he's changed it in like the last year or two. So because he's not doing it very often, then that really kind of tells you that you're going to have a little bit of you don't have a whole lot to worry about there. Kiro, check the URL up on the screen there in order to see where you can go post questions at. I just don't take them directly from Twitch because the chat goes flying by, and by the time I get to yours, I'll have lost it. Next up, let's see here. Renzi asks, what is your opinion of constrained core VMs for Azure SQL VM? So for me, it all comes down to what's the problem that you're trying to solve. You'll usually hear me ask that to at least one question during every office hours. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? Because otherwise it's like somebody saying, hey, what's your opinion of hammers? Well, they're really good if you need a hammer. If you're trying to put a screw in, they're really bad. So I have to know what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and that'll tell me. All the time in my training classes, I think about myself as like a carpenter with a whole bunch of tools laid out in front of me on my desktop. And I say during my training classes, it's a lot about finding the right tool for the particular task. Like Renegade says, you hit that right on the head, or hit that right on the nail head. Iceman asks, Brent, I'm getting back into SQL Server on premises. I see that Polybase seems to be a cool feature, but I've never heard of it. Why would you think it's cool? If you've never heard of it, what makes you think it's cool? The cool stuff you've usually heard of. So it seems like it's an excellent feature. Why? Why would you say that? It smells like a dead raccoon. Says I would usually use a linked server. Why? Don't do that either. Connect to the thing that has the data you want. Just like you wouldn't ask a friend to go do something else for you, you shouldn't go ask SQL Server to fetch the data from somewhere else. Connect to the server that has the data you need. I give that advice often to clients too. My tea got cold says, what is the DBA equivalent of automated unit testing? So there is this product called T-SQL-T. T-SQL-T, all one word, no dashes, just T-SQL-T. And that has the ability to mock tables, mock table contents, has CLR, extended stored procedures, so that you can call code and make sure that it returns the right results. So start there with T-SQL-T. Now, I will say that out of the entire universe of people who do Microsoft SQL Server work, almost nobody uses it. I'd say it's maybe 1% of 1% of people even consider using it, let alone actually start. Next up, let's see, we'll grab one from the new queue. That Carol says, hey Brent, I'm currently studying intelligence systems for my major, such as machine learning. Can you give me an idea for my final year project? If you look up OtterTune, O-T-T-E-R, Tune, OtterTune. It is the guys from Cambridge. I say guys, the people from Cambridge, I believe it is, University. It's not Cambridge, it's Carnegie Mellon University. And they're doing machine learning for tuning databases, that they'll automatically try tuning different dials in order to make the database server go faster. I would look at that just because I think that it's an interesting use case for machine learning. They actually got VC funding, and so it also tells you the kind of thing that if you pick the right project, that you have the potential for getting VC funding even while you're in college, which is kind of cool. Next up, we have Freud, who asks, is it ever okay to lead a non-clustered index with an equality search column followed by an inequality search column followed by an equality search column? If so, when? Well, I have the answers in My Black Friday sale over at my Black Friday sale, brentozar.com/Black Friday. We have our fundamentals of index tuning course, our mastering index tuning course. The fundamentals of index tuning course covers that exact answer. So you can go pick that up over at brentozar.com/Black Friday. I wish I had a 10-second answer for that, but of course, if I had a 10-second answer, then I would just simply give it to you instead of having to charge for training classes. But of course, I have to charge for training classes in order to pay for all the nice things that I have. Woohoo! There we go. Let's see. Next up, Kang says, there it goes. King says, for boxed SQL, should we clear SQL Server's wait stats after changing the compat level to the latest level? No, for me, no. When I want to change clear wait stats, all I do is use SP Blitz First instead. SP Blitz First will take samples of your wait stats and show you what happened during that time. I think that's much more efficient than clearing wait stats. So I've never cleared wait stats. It's not something that I do. I use SP Blitz First instead. Next up, Peter says, have you ever had to disable T-SQL scalar UDF inlining for a database? And if so, why? Yes, absolutely. The great example of folks who actually talked about it publicly was Stack Overflow. StackOverflow.com, when SQL Server 2019 first came out, tried using scalar UDF inlining, and it drove SQL Server's CPU straight to 100% CPU. The only way that they could get that box to be recoverable again was to turn off scalar function inlining. So that's the classic example. Next up, Diana says, do you know of any gotchas when I'm running cross-database queries where two databases are in different compat levels? The compat level of the database where you issue the query, that's the one that you inherit. So if you run a query from DB 150, well, DB with 150 compat level, then that's the compat level you're going to get for your execution plan, regardless of whose objects that you touch in other databases. The compat level is based on the database that you're in. Next up, Bill asks, does the first responder kit follow the same end-of-life schedule as Microsoft does for SQL Server versions? My general answer is that once Microsoft gives up supporting a version of SQL Server, so do I. Now, that doesn't mean that we immediately abandon support for it in the first responder kit, but what it means is that as we write new code, as we add new checks into the first responder kit, we don't bother trying to be compatible with previous versions of SQL Server from that point forward. If there's a new cool thing that's only available in currently supported versions of T-SQL, then that's what we're going to use. Whereas when people check in new features, I try to watch the T-SQL that they use, and if they use something that's not supported in a currently supported version, like 2016, then I'll be like, hold up, we need to make sure this works in all supported versions. Next up, Aditya says, are there any troubleshooting benefits to naming T-SQL transactions as opposed to not naming them? I have never had that as an issue for me, but I know that, or I've never had it as a benefit for me, but I know that there are third-party products that explicitly name their transactions, so that they can go back when they're doing transaction restores or transaction log restores, so that they can say restore up to this marked transaction. I want to say BizSpark did that, Microsoft BizSpark. I've never done it though, so that's the only one that I know of. Next up, Rushing SQL says, did anyone let you know that Bob Ward gave a class on AlwaysON availability groups and you were listed at the top of his reference slide? No, I am shocked. I am completely shocked unless it was a bad reference. I don't think that I have anything that I could teach Bob Ward, at least in terms of anything related to the... Okay, so I remember with great pleasure Bob Ward was trying to get on a conference Wi-Fi network one time, and I taught him about the magic of neverssl.com. There's one other time in my career where I have taught Bob Ward something, and that's it. But for him to acknowledge me, and that was probably a mistype. Probably what it said was, here's a list of things that people that you should never try to learn anything about from availability groups, and then he put my name into there. God bless him. He's a wonderful guy. I love him to death. He's brilliant. He's a great speaker. If you ever get the chance to watch him, you should absolutely do it. Let's see. Tom says, hi, I have a question before purchasing a product. SQL Server standard 15 clients. What does the 15 client mean? It means that you have 15 people who will be accessing that SQL Server. The named clients thing works really well for very tiny small businesses, but as soon as you have to hook up that SQL Server to anything that's connected to the internet, you're kind of screwed. It's not that the SQL Server is exposed to the internet, but if it's connected to any web server, app server that has a large number of users connecting to it, you simply can't use the CAL-based licensing, and you have to do CPU-based licensing instead. Next up, Bobo DBA says, hi Brent, would partitioning a 300 million row table monthly on a date time column provide better query performance than a non-clustered index on that column? No. Stakeholder is demanding partitioning, but he doesn't have to maintain it. It's very simple. Take yourself a development server and do the partitioning that they're asking for. And then compare the queries back and forth. Show not just the query runtime, but show their execution plans. Put an index on one and partition the other, and then show the query results between the two. Now, I said no when I first got started, but of course I should point out that depending on how you design the index and depending on what the queries are, you could see partitioning have a better result, because partitioning could conceivably change the clustering key of the entire table. And if you're doing clustered index scans regularly, like a data warehousing type query, it could make a difference. But that's the easy way that you find that out. Next up, the Vibrant DBA, interesting, says on quizzes, slow queries performance. I hear you mention despite the I'm not even sure what you're asking. Moreover, try to rephrase your question in a more concise way, and just there's a great a former boss that I had said, try to use as few words as you possibly can. Go back through and when you're writing something to someone, redact every word that isn't actually related to the question. He says, you've got a story about your question. No one wants to hear the story. Mark out all the story words. What's your question? And then go from there. Next up, Sigurdur says, does the memory grant property for a query plan include the memory used to read pages from disk into the buffer pool? No, not at all. Memory grant is only that sort space and join space, parallelism space that we talk about in my How to Think Like the Engine class. It's the little scribble pages that SQL Server uses in order to write things down. But if it's just reading data that's coming from the buffer pool, you don't get granted memory in order to read that data. That data is just going to be up in memory. Next up, Here I Am says, what's your opinion on CDC and its use in products like Golden Gate for replication? So my thing is always, like for anything change tracking, change data capture, SQL servers, temporal tables, anytime that you want to track what's changing in the database and you make the primary replica do that tracking, there's going to be an overhead. How much the overhead is depends on how fast the data is changing and how much of it is changing and how much you're polling to go see what changed. Do I have any particular feelings about one product or another? Not really. To me, they all add overhead in differing amounts. It's just that how often are you tracking these, or how often is the data changing? How often are you pulling it off? Those are the conversations that I usually have with clients to find out how much of an overhead we're actually going to add to that SQL server. Next up, Renegade Larson says, I'm starting to see that in Europe, many customers are focusing on security. Do you see the same trend in the US? No. No. There are a lot of security teams. There are a lot of auditors. But I don't particularly see people doing a great job of securing customer data. I'll give you a great example. There was recently a app that came out for Android that would let you use Apple's messages, but even though you were on Android, which is something that Apple doesn't support. And when this product came out, there was so much outrage around the security that the company had to pull it the same day because so many people quickly traced its networking and figured out that the messages were going across the wire in plain text. Your username and password was being stored in plain text. It was visible to other people on the internet. So I don't see a big focus on it. I see a lot of lip service. We take your security very seriously. It's very important to us. But no, we don't really see that in the US. And the continued breaches of credit card companies, credit bureau companies, hospitals kind of proves that people aren't really focusing. David Rebow says, it depends on the company. Security makes life more difficult. It makes development more difficult. Systems administration, database administration, storing backups, reporting, moving data into data lakes, all that stuff becomes more difficult. And companies are often trying to be very agile, and they want everybody to have quick access to the data and do all kinds of fancy pants machine learning and AI type products, which security kind of stands in the way of that. I don't mean to sound like I'm anti-security. I'm very pro-security. That's explaining why you don't see a lot of it in the U.S. Vinícius says, hi, I'm from Brazil. I'm a non-database person. What are the basic maintenance tasks that I should look at on my Azure SQL DB? A few thousand inserts per month into 2 tables. A few thousand inserts per month is nothing. You shouldn't need to do any maintenance on that whatsoever, except updating statistics. If you go to Brento's, or if you go to our YouTube channel and you search for statistics, we have a whole class on statistics that'll teach you why it's important and what maintenance tasks you need to do on a regular basis. Updating stats will be the big one there. Next up, Slow Cheetah says, my query performance is good for a given query when I'm forcing parallelism with a certain trace flag. It's bad without this. What is your opinion of trace flag 8649? Don't touch it. Put that down. I don't know who told you about that. I don't know where you read that from. That is an incredibly bad idea. What you want to use instead is the parallelism query hint. If you search for SQL Server parallel query hint, there's a query hint that you can use. It's totally supported. It encourages your query to go parallel without having to touch any trace flags. Generally speaking, trace flags are a really crappy idea. Ha! Next up, Ingeborg says, have the Iceland lava flows affected any friends or places that you visited? Yes. So I lived, for those of you who don't know, I lived in Iceland for about a year during the pandemic. I adore Iceland. I'm sure I'm going to go back probably during 2024. Probably not for quite as extended of a period. It'll probably be only for a couple of months the next time, but then go back longer than that. But yes, it's affected the highway that you go on between the airport, the Blue Lagoon, Lagoon and Reykjavik, the most common highway through there. And it closed the Blue Lagoon altogether just out of safety. But Grindavik is a relatively low populated area. And if you look at a map overhead on Iceland, where the brand new land is forming, where all this lava, all the eruptions that you see happen all the time in Iceland, it's extending the island out in a new direction. Generally speaking, there's not a lot of stuff out there. This is the slow magma flows. Iceland has plenty of other volcanoes that are eruptive type flows that blow the roof off the volcano like Mount St. Helens did in the United States. Eyjafjallajökull. Probably not perfect pronunciation on that, but I'm proud of how close I am. That one blew its top and stopped all flights in Europe. That one's different. David says Reykjavik Airport in winter is bleak, especially if you have to walk to your plane. I adore Iceland in the winter. I think it's amazing. The more you drive through the country, it's just spectacular. It's so it's alienish. It's amazing. Chakra says, what is your opinion of the keep fixed query plan hint? Do you ever like to use it? No. No. I don't think I've ever used it. If I had to use something like that, what I would probably do instead is a query guide, a plan guide, using Query Store or just using the built-in plan guide functionality. I haven't had a really good time with that particular query hint. Let's see, next up we have Hakan says, hi Brent, we get a new backup file every night where we have to import data from. Do you know any common reasons for running restores getting stuck in restoring very often? The database is unreadable and need to recover it after replacing. Yeah, the thing that usually catches you is network blips in between from where you're restoring the database from. Network blips there. What I would do if you're restoring it every night is I would actually copy it. Surly Dev, hey, good to see you. I would actually copy it locally to that SQL server, and this is going to sound like complete overkill. I would restart that SQL server. The combination of those two things should get you a more reliable restore, assuming you have the ability to restart it. Hera says, what's the best and worst VM naming conventions that you've ever seen? Far and away, people who get fancy with superheroes, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. I don't know any of your stupid character names. I don't know how to spell them. I don't know what Asragarth meant or why it has any significance. I can't spell those damn things. Use the frickin' where the thing is at, what department it services, whether or not it's production, HA, DR, QA, whatever. But lose those stupid Simpsons characters' names, things like that. So Surly Dev says you're using the new teleprompter. I'm not. That's actually over there. I don't know if you can see it very well. Underneath here, underneath this camera, I actually have a separate a monitor. So I've got I keep gradually upgrading all my setups, but right directly in front of this, I have, underneath the camera you're looking at, I have a window with the Twitch chat and with the questions, which makes it way easier. Man, I've been suffering from a cough for like 2 months now. It's probably like, what's something that produces a cough for like 2 months straight? Pneumonia. That's the thing I was trying to think of. I'm also suffering from memory loss. Raghav says, do you like any third-party backups for SQL Server AG backups over native backups? I am completely fine with all kinds of native or third-party backups. The thing that's cool with third-party backups is they often give you things like table-level restores or better GUIs for log shipping. So I love all of that. David said, COVID, I just had it. I've had it a couple of times over the last couple of years, and I know that's certainly not helping anything either. Q-Ent asks, hi Brent, can you suggest any articles related to CPU Mathematics 101? I'm struggling to understand how to map query time with a percentage of CPU. You can't. That's not how this works. Remember that every core has its own percentages, And there are all kinds of other things using CPU time. There's SQL Server itself. There's third-party services. There's Windows built in. There's also other noisy neighbor VMs. There's query compilation time, things that'll read the transaction log. There are huge numbers of things that affect CPU. What I would do is I'd take a step back and I'd say, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And don't say, well, I'm trying to tie query time to percent usage of CPU. No, why? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And then that'll probably help get closer to a good answer there. We'll do one more. Richard asks, what's the best way to import databases from a Google Cloud SQL Server to an Azure SQL Server not on a VM? So when you say Azure SQL Server not on a VM, there's no such thing. There's Azure SQL DB, there's Azure SQL DB Hyperscale, there's Azure Managed Instances, and I teach you about how all of those and how to move data from one place to another. I teach you all of that over at my Running SQL Server in the Cloud course. That's over at brentozar.com/Black Friday. It is on sale today for Black Friday as well. In that class, I teach you the differences between those products, the pros and cons, as well as how to migrate data from one place to the other. That's the Running SQL Server in the Cloud class. You can get that over at brentozar.com/Black Friday. All right. I guess I'll do one other. Bull Red just happened to come in. Bull Red says, did you enjoy the F1 weekend in Las Vegas? I loved it. So we were down there for Thursday for the first practice day, that only lasted 9 minutes before the manhole covers or water pump covers popped up and trashed a couple of cars. Had a great time listening to the noise down there and seeing the spectacles. Amazing. We were sitting right by the spheres. It looked just spectacular. Then came back home, watched some of the qualifying stuff overnight in my home theater, and then had a big watch party at my house. Had a combination watch party and birthday party over at my house. So had a bunch of people, friends and family over. I felt really bad because I forgot to take pictures. I do this really often. We'll throw a big party and then I don't take any pictures. But we had a ton of people over, great food, wine, had a really good time, watched the race live. It was a ton of fun, really enjoyed it. So that is it for me. I am going to now go back, and I've seen a whole bunch of emails go through the computer as I've been standing here teaching this. A whole bunch of emails go through. I'm going to go do my Black Friday tech support. Hope y'all had fun, and I will see you at the next office hours. Adios, y'all.